Good day. I am Dr. Manoj Mathur. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Senthil and team Ophthall for giving me this opportunity to speak about telemedicine today. Of my exposition today spurs in the practice of telemedicine. I bring greetings from Swaroop Eye Center and Medivision Eye Care at Hyderabad. Medicine efforts, timely access to appropriate optimal interventions, faster access to services that may not be otherwise available, that results in saving of effort and inconvenience, especially to rural patients as they need not travel long distances, cuts financial costs associated with travel. Telemedicine can also play a particularly important role, especially for regular routine checkups or continuous monitoring. Telemedicine can reduce the burden on the secondary hospitals. With telemedicine, maintenance of records and documentation is inherent, and written documentation naturally increases the legal protection of both the parties, the patient as well as the doctor. The medical practice in India till 2019 was governed by the existing provisions under the Indian Medical Council Act 1956, its Professional Conduct, Etiquette and Ethics Regulation 2002, the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940 and its Rules 1945, the Clinical Establishment Act 2010, the Information Technology Act, and the Information Technology, Reasonable Security Practices and Procedures and Sensitive Personal Data or Information Rules 2011. These acts primarily govern the practice of medicine and information technology, but grey areas and gaps in legislation and the uncertainty of rules pose a risk for both the doctors and the patients. Pandemic impaired the life of an entire population all over the country and set a new normal. Now, personal protection equipment use becomes a must, disinfection protocol needs to be followed, and social distancing norms have to be adhered to. And compliance of this has an adverse impact on standard OPD care that needed to be deferred. Only emergencies were being attended, financial distress to low and middle class population, and disruption of transport services added to the problem. To address this problem, the government, with its commitment to provide equal access to quality care to all and realizing the fact that digital health is a critical enabler for the overall transformation of the health system, the government legalized mainstreaming telemedicine in health systems to minimize inequity and barriers to access. Now, the government lays significant focus on the use of telemedicine services, especially in the health and wellness centers at the grassroots level, wherein the mid-level provider, that is the healthcare worker, can connect the patients to the doctors through technology platforms in providing timely and best possible care. March 25th, 2020 turned out to be a watershed day for the practice of medicine in India. On this day, the government, through a public notice, incorporated telemedicine practice guidelines as Appendix 5 and amended the rules and regulation of Indian Medical Council Professional Conduct, Etiquette and Ethics Regulations 2002 by adding Regulation 3.8 titled as Consultation by Telemedicine in the said regulations. Now, let's consider the definitions of telemedicine, RMP, and telehealth. WHO defines telemedicine as the delivery of healthcare services where distance is a critical factor by all healthcare professionals using information and communication technologies for the exchange of valid information for diagnosis, treatment and prevention of disease and injuries, research and evaluation, and the continuing education of healthcare workers with the aim of advancing the health of individuals and communities. The definition of RMP, that is the registered medical practitioner, is defined as a person who is enrolled in the state medical register or the Indian medical register under the IMC Act 1956. Health is defined as the delivery and facilitation of health and health-related services, including medical care, provider and patient education, health information services, and self-care via telecommunication and digital communication technologies. So, in general, telemedicine is used to denote clinical service delivered by a registered medical practitioner, while telehealth is a broader term of use of technology for health and health-related services, including telemedicine. The Scope of telemedicine in India includes all channels of communication with the patient that leverage information technology platforms including video, audio, text and digital data exchange. But there are certain exclusions. The guidelines specifically explicitly exclude the following: use of digital technology to conduct surgical or invasive procedures remotely, other aspects of telehealth such as research and evaluation and continuing education of healthcare workers as of now is excluded, and it also does not provide for consultations outside the jurisdiction of India. RMPs are entitled to practice telemedicine. All of them, however, will take an online course on practice of telemedicine as and when specified by the government in the next 3 years. All the RMPs are entitled to provide telemedicine consultation to patients from any part of the country. RMPs using telemedicine shall uphold the same professional and ethical norms and standards as applicable to traditional in-person care within the intrinsic limitations of telemedicine. Enable all the RMPs who would want to practice telemedicine get familiar with these guidelines as well as with the process and limitations of telemedicine practice. An online program will be developed and made available by the Board of Governors. All registered medical practitioners intending to provide online consultation need to complete a mandatory online course within 3 years of its notification, and in the interim period, the principles mentioned in these guidelines need to be followed. Thereafter, undergoing and qualifying such a course as prescribed will be essential prior to the practice of medicine. So, as of now, in the current pandemic situation, we are permitted to practice telemedicine, but as and when the government specifies an online course on telemedicine, we need to complete it to legally take the process of telemedicine forward in future. Telemedicine applications can be classified into four basic types. Number one, according to the mode of communication. Number two, according to the timing of the information transmitted. Number three, the purpose of consultation. And lastly, interaction between the individuals involved, be it an RMP to patient or caregiver or an RMP to RMP. Now, let's look into the specifics. According to the mode of communication, it can be a video consultation, that is on video or chat platforms, or an audio consultation, that is on phone or voice over internet protocol. Or it can be even text based, like all these platforms. It can be text, it can be chat platform through WhatsApp or Google Hangouts or Facebook Messenger, etc. Or it can be even asynchronous, that is through email and fax. According to timing of information transmitted, the interaction can be real-time, either through video, audio, or text interaction, or also it can be asynchronous exchange of relevant information like supplementary data, including images, lab reports, and radiological investigations that can be uploaded. And such data can be forwarded to different parties at any point of time and thereafter accessed as per convenience or need. The purpose of communication, it can be on a non-emergency basis where the patients may consult with an RMP for diagnosis and treatment of the condition or for health education and counseling, and also do a follow-up consultation with the same RMP. Whereas for emergency consultations, they should be avoided, but in case alternative care is not present, and telemedicine consultation should be limited to first aid or a life-saving measure or counseling and advice on referral. In all cases of emergency consultations, the patient must be advised for an in-person interaction with an RMP at the earliest. Type of telemedicine application is based on interaction between the individuals involved, be it RMP to patient or caregiver to the RMP, or it can be between RMP to RMP. That means a junior doctor can consult a senior doctor through telemedicine, or it can be either a health worker consulting the RMP to give care to the patient. Guidelines for telemedicine in India specifically refer to the professional judgment of an RMP should be the guiding principle for all telemedicine consultations. An RMP is well positioned to decide whether a technology-based consultation is sufficient or an in-person review is needed. There should be no compromise on the quality of care, and basically 7 elements need to be considered before beginning any telemedicine consultation. They are the context of consultation, identification of a RMP as well as the patient, the mode of communication, the consent of the patient, the specific type of consultation, the patient evaluation, and the patient management guidelines. We are talking about the context of consultation. The RMP should exercise their professional judgment to decide whether a telemedicine consultation is appropriate in a given situation or an in-person consultation. They should consider the mode and the technologies available and their adequacy for a diagnosis. They should be reasonably comfortable with telemedicine. They should be able to understand the complexity of the patient's health condition. The condition may be different, either simple or complex, and the RMP shall uphold the same standard of care as an in-person consultation, but within the intrinsic limits of telemedicine. There is no leniency as far as negligence issues are concerned for in-person consultation or a telemedicine consultation. Coming to identification, telemedicine consultation cannot be anonymous. An RMP should verify and confirm the patient's identity by either name, age, address, email ID, phone number, or a registered ID as appropriate. On the other hand, the RMP should also ensure that there is a mechanism for the patient to verify the credentials and contact details of the RMP. For issuing a prescription, the RMP needs to ask the age of the patient and, if needed, age proof. Where the patient is a minor, after confirming the age, teleconsultation is allowed only if the minor is consulting in presence of an identified adult. Every RMP shall display the registration number on prescriptions, website, and other such electronic communications. As being discussed already, the mode of communication can be primarily video, audio, or text. But there may be situations where, in order to reach a diagnosis and to understand the context better, a real-time consultation may be preferable over an asynchronous exchange of information. Forms a vital necessity for any telemedicine consultation. The consent can be of two types. Number one, implied, or number two, explicit. An implied consent means the patient initiates consultation on his own, then the consent is implied. Whereas explicit consent means that if a health worker is initiating consultation on behalf of the patient, or if a care worker is initiating consultation on behalf of the patient, or an RMP, that means a junior doctor trying to consult a senior doctor on behalf of the patient, then explicit consent of the patient is required. What do you mean by explicit consent? The explicit consent can be either in the form of a text message or an audio message or a video message or even asynchronous through an email from the patient to the RMP, giving an explicit consent to be consulted through a caregiver or an RMP or even a health worker. As regards patient information, RMPs must gather sufficient information before making any professional judgment. An RMP would use his professional discretion to gather the type and extent of patient information. This can be further supplemented through conversation with a healthcare worker, provider, and by any information supported by technology-based tools. If an RMP feels that the information received is inadequate, then he can request for additional information in real time or shared later via email or text, as per the nature of such information. For example, an RMP may advise some laboratory and or radiological tests to the patient. An important factor that we all need to know is that telemedicine has its own set of limitations. If a physical examination is critical information for consultation, RMP should not proceed until a physical examination can be arranged through an in-person consult. That can be either an examination by another RMP or a health worker or a in-person consultation. The information required may vary from one RLP to another based on his or her professional experience and discretion, and for that different medical conditions based on the defined clinical standards and standard treatment guidelines. Types of consultation. First consultation and the follow-up consultation. The first consult should preferably be via video for better judgment and better advice. If the patient is seen in person earlier by the RMP, then it is possible to be more comprehensive in managing that patient. First consult basically means the patient is consulting with the RMP for the first time, or the patient has consulted with the RMP earlier but more than 6 months have elapsed, or the patient has consulted with the RMP earlier but for a different health condition. Follow-up consultation means the patient is consulting with the same RMP within 6 months of his previous in-person consultation, and this is for continuation of the care of the same health condition. However, it will not be considered as a follow-up if there are new symptoms that are not in the spectrum of the same health condition, or RMP does not recall the context of previous treatment and advice. The last of the 7 elements of telemedicine involves patient management. If the condition can be appropriately managed by telemedicine based on the type of consultation, then the RMP may proceed with a professional judgment to either provide health education as appropriate, or provide counseling related to specific clinical condition, or prescribe medication. Health education means an RMP may impart health promotion and disease prevention messages. These could be related to diet, physical activity, cessation of smoking, contagious infections, and so on. Likewise, he may give advice on immunizations, exercises, hygiene practices, mosquito control, etc. When we talk about counseling, this is specific advice given to patients, and it may, for instance, include food restrictions, do's and don'ts for a patient to mitigate the underlying condition. This may also include advice for new investigations that need to be carried out before the next consult. Regarding prescription of medicines, prescribing medications via telemedicine consultation is at the professional discretion of the RMP. It entails the same professional accountability as in the traditional in-person consult. If a medical condition requires a particular protocol to diagnose and prescribe as in case of an in-person consult, then the same prevailing principle will be applicable to a telemedicine consult. Prescribe medicines via telemedicine only when RMP is satisfied that he has gathered adequate and relevant information about the patient's medical condition, and prescribed medicines are in the best interest of the patient. It is very important for us to know that without an appropriate diagnosis or a provisional diagnosis will amount to a professional misconduct. Never ever prescribe medicines by telemedicine route without specifying the probable provisional diagnosis or a specific diagnosis for your patient. There are specific restrictions on prescribing medicines on consult via telemedicine depending upon the type of consultation and the mode of consultation. The categories of medicines that can be prescribed via teleconsultation will be as notified in consultation with the central government from time to time. The categories of medicines that can be prescribed are classified and listed as below. Basically 4 categories: List O, List A, List B, and the prohibited list. The medicines in List O are those medicines which are safe to be prescribed through any mode of teleconsultation. In essence, they would comprise of medicines which are used for common conditions and are often available over the counter. O means over the counter. For instance, these medicines would include paracetamol, ORS solutions, cough lozenges, etc. Medicines that may be deemed necessary during public health emergencies. If there is a public health emergency in such a situation, these drugs which are classified under List O can also be prescribed through teleconsultation. Are those medications which can be prescribed during the first consultation, which has to be a video consultation, and are being re-prescribed for refill in case of a follow-up. The follow-up consultation can be any mode like audio or text. This would be an inclusion list containing relatively safe medicines with low potential for abuse. This is a list of medication which RMP can prescribe in a patient who is undergoing follow-up consultation as a refill. List B is a list of medication which RMP can prescribe in a patient who is undergoing follow-up consultation in addition to those which have been prescribed during in-person consult for the same medical condition. Whereas in the prohibited list are the medicines which cannot be prescribed via telemedicine consultation. These medicines have a high potential of abuse and could harm the patient or the society at large if used improperly. These drugs are generally Schedule X of Drug and Cosmetic Act and rules or any narcotic and psychotropic substance listed in the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act 1985. Now, again to reiterate the list of drugs, list O are over-the-counter drugs and can be prescribed safely by any mode of consultation, audio, video or text. List A comprises those drugs which need to be prescribed only over a video consultation as a first consult but can be prescribed by any other mode as a follow-up refill medication. Whereas list B medicines are those that can be prescribed only on follow-up provided you have personally examined the patient in person as a first consult. Whereas the drugs that are listed in the prohibited category should never be prescribed over telemedicine. Issue and transmission of prescription implies that the RMP shall issue a prescription as per the Indian Medical Council regulations and shall not contravene the provisions of Drugs and Cosmetics Act and rules. RMP shall provide photo, scan, digital copy of a signed prescription as per the standard format or e-prescription to the patient via email or any messaging platform. In case the RMP is transmitting the prescription directly to a pharmacy, he must ensure explicit consent of the patient that entitles him to get the medicines dispensed from any pharmacy of his choice. For our telemedicine practice, we need to settle for an app that conforms to all the guidelines proposed by the government in their public notice circulated on March 25. For my telemedical practice, am planning to use this app Telemedal. This is the home screen which shows that we are accepting consultation and the third screen shows the doctor's login page. Demonstrates the doctor's profile, the name, the contact address, the registration details, the consultation fee, the doctor's designation, the specializations. The patient search can search from symptoms, about the doctor's name and about the area of practice. It also denotes the total experience about the doctor, the clinic and the hospital address, and the languages known by the doctor, and you can decide about your consultation time for your telemedical practice. You can predefine a list of questions that you want the patient to answer before you begin your telemedical consultation. Patient's perspective, we are able to see here the patient's login page, the patient's previous records are also displayed, and the patient has the discretion to select the doctor of his/her choice. The patient can select the doctor either by name, specialty, or symptomatology. The patient also has the choice to select a doctor who is practicing in the vicinity of the concerned area. The doctor's charges, consultation through video, audio, and text are also shown to the patient. Once the patient selects the doctor, he proceeds to pay the doctor's consultation online and generates a receipt. Then, the most important thing is the patient has to give access to his or her medical records to the doctor for further consultation. After the specific consultation, either video, audio or text, the doctor goes on to prescribe medication and transmit the prescription to the patient based on the standard prescribed format by the Medical Council of India. Synopsis: Telemedicine in India is the future way to go. Telemedicine has now come to stay and holds a very great promise for future. All RMPs who are yet unable to practice physically can definitely opt for telemedicine. An online course in telemedicine shall be introduced soon and all of us need to complete it. This course shall be mandatory for practice of telemedicine in future. Of all the multiple options available now, only a few which adhere to the aforesaid norms shall hold ground. We need to select the best one as per our needs to practice. With this, I complete my exposition on the topic Pearls in the Practice of Telemedicine. For any further clarifications, you may contact me personally on my email ID drmathur1961 at hotmail.com or on mobile. I would like to thank Dr. Senthil and team Ophthall for giving me this opportunity, and thank you all delegates for your patient hearing.